Thumbs up, right. Welcome to this closing session of today's conference. I'm Paul Goodman, editor of Conservative Home, and I'm delighted in a few moments to be introducing the Minister. But first of all, I want to ask Louise Kingham from BP to come up and say a few words.
Thank you very much, Paul. Minister, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to have been with you. And actually, I did sneak in a little bit earlier just to listen to a little of the conversation. So at BP, we are very pleased to support this event this morning. And I am very privileged to look after and lead BP in the UK and across Europe. So you can imagine that's been a bit of a busy time. I've only been at BP for 18 months, so it's been quite a whirlwind. But I just wanted to try and touch on a few of the points that I've heard from you this morning as you've shared and reflected on your views about where we're at and what the opportunities are from someone who wants to put shovels in the ground, and indeed in certain places already is, and from someone that has £18 billion to invest in the UK in the next 7 years. I was saying 8, but now I've got to say 7 as the clock ticks on, which is around about 17% of BP's global capital allocation. So and a lot more than we make in the UK in terms of profits to the business. So a fantastic opportunity which my organisation globally can see and want to do here in the UK. And appreciating, of course, it's very challenging times. The Chancellor and the government have had to make some difficult calls. We're up for contributing to that, as I know many others are, but it also stimulates some concerns. So I wanted to just try and make a few points along some of the lines we've heard you talking about this morning, just to share with you where we're at and where we think we can contribute and make a difference. So in terms of our role in the UK, we've obviously got an important business in the North Sea, in the oil and gas business, and we intend to bring more projects like Seagull and Marlock on stream between 2022 and 2025. And we have been continuing that investment, looking for opportunities to bring emissions down in the basin. And this year we will contribute about £2.3 billion in taxes as a result of that part of our business in action. But we're also busy investing from that sum I've just mentioned to you in low carbon energy right across the system. In Teesside, we've got projects that are designed around building the first commercial clean gas power station with carbon capture and storage. We've also got blue hydrogen and green hydrogen projects where we have got shovels in the ground, but we'd like them to go faster and get to that endpoint, that operating point more quickly. And of course, we've got with the CCS part of that project, we've also got the Northern Endurance Partnership, which is the pipeline and storage facility with the aquifer off in the North Sea. We also have our active renewables business, so we've got investments in Lightsource BP, you'll be familiar with, I suspect, 14 or so projects across the UK, not on prime agricultural land, but land that gets used is available for other purposes for which this suits. And we've also got a range of offshore wind projects as well, so around about 6 gigawatts that we are investing in, which can produce energy for about 6 million homes. And we also have, through our retail and convenience business, through the forecourts that you see, we're also investing in electrification. So £1 billion of that programme is towards tripling the number of charge points that we have across the UK as we build that business out over the next decade. I've heard you mention a lot this morning about is net zero good for the economy? Our view is absolutely that investing in energy security for today and net zero for the future is about doubling down on both of those things, delivering and in terms of energy technologies and opportunities in order to create growth and increase productivity. So we touch about 75,000 jobs in the UK, 15,000 directly and then through others indirectly across the country. We have worked with 10,000 suppliers in the supply chain in the UK just in 2021, and we spent around about £4.3 billion. So absolutely is low carbon investment, as well as working on supplying indigenous resources and maximising the economic value from those whilst reducing emissions at the same time, all good for the country. We believe that it is. And when you talked about jobs earlier and job creation, in addition to what we already touched, I can tell you that my Teesside projects will create 4,000 construction jobs and 1,500 operating jobs for each year of its operating life thereafter. Not insignificant. I also heard a bit of debate about can we attract talent to these jobs? Well, I advertised in the UK business for 100 wind jobs and 100 hydrogen, and I had 10,000 applications. So absolutely is the interest there in net zero. Clearly, we have to manage the skills and talent and capability to make sure that they match, but definitely the interest is very much there. You also touched on whether this is good for global Britain. I would argue it absolutely is. So when I think about our Teesside projects, we already have inward investment secured to the next 2 stages, the feed programmes of those 2 projects from both Masdar and ADNOC, so companies from the Middle East, who we've had long-range partnerships with in other areas, who are very interested to learn and see what we do here in the UK and then have the capability to export that globally. Some fantastic opportunity. But what we need to do that is to go faster on all of these things. So I have the investment, I have the commitment, I have the people that want to get on with the job, we have the resources to be able to deliver on those, and we need to work in partnership then with government, with regulators and others, so that we move in concert. That's our biggest challenge now. Given the pressure of time that we're up against with the targets that we've set for ourselves and the ambition that we have, and given that we've had a period of uncertainty, now we just want that to settle, and we want as developers and investors to be able to move much more quickly, which I know government shares our ambition to do. Because if we want to harness the value of the things that I've just mentioned, and particularly the export potential, we need to maintain that climate leadership. And that means, and I think that window, if we're really honest, because we've had a difficult time, that window has closed and narrowed a little bit. It's still there, we're still advantaged, but we do need to get on with the job if we're to maintain that and really create global economic value that benefits back to the UK. So I wish you well for the closing session. I know you're going to have a fantastic conversation now as you listen to the Minister. At BP, we're all in and very committed to what we can do here in the UK. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the session. I've been pleased to be with you today. Thank you.
Louise, in introducing Graham, I want to thank BP very warmly for making this event possible today. And Minister, in welcoming you, I'm just going to say a few words as an editor about this conference and what lies behind it. First, as an editor, the top subject for pieces coming into ConHome over the last few years has not been Brexit, it's been net zero. And that indicates, I think, something of the interest and absorption that business in particular is showing with the net zero agenda. Next, second, this conference, of course, is called Powering, to get my words exactly right, powering the country. So the emphasis is on power, and energy security has suddenly become an enormous issue because of the war. And then finally, third, of course, all this takes place in the context of a cost of living crisis. So from my simple view as an editor, there's this kind of triangle of net zero, energy security, and affordability for the consumer. And sometimes the points of those triangles can rub up against each other just a little bit uncomfortably. But at any rate, you're going to smooth them all out for us, Graham, in whatever you say, and I'm looking forward to my conversation with you afterwards. So a very warm welcome to you to this conference.
Good morning. It still is morning, so I'm fresh back from Sharm, last night in fact, which is 17 years on from my first COP. I went to Montreal in 2005, and it was full there, I remember, of sort of, it seemed to be wringing wet lefties, frankly, wanting to divide everyone into sheep and goats, wanting to have theological conversations about how definite the science was or wasn't. And as a new Tory MP, sceptical of mind, and having run his business for some time, it just struck me it was a risk that we should manage, because it was going to be the most extraordinary conspiracy theory if all these people all over the planet, all these scientists, were all lying to us. So it struck me it was a pretty serious risk we needed to manage. At which point you then go, well, what we need to do is accelerate the cost curve downwards, because if we can come up with a way of dealing with our energy system, with other systems that reduces these emissions and reduces these risks, then that's got to be the smart thing to do. And the more we accelerate the cost curve down, the more that we can deliver effective change. So that was 17 years ago. So then here I am back again. I was involved in the meantime, and Sam Hall, I like to think that I have this green diaspora, which I'll take false credit for. But Sam worked for me for a bit. Simon Clark came in pretty skeptical before going on and getting involved with it too. But a kind of realistic, pragmatic, conservative view of it. Let's look at the frameworks and incentives in the system. Let's see if we can accelerate the cost curve downward. And if we, as the UK, can lead in that, well, the way to make sense of that and keep my pretty gritty, realistic, and often low-paid constituents happy, I better show that we're also bringing home the bacon for them. We better show that we can deliver. That there isn't. It's not a net zero over here and economic growth over here. We've got to bring them both together. And let's not keep dividing people into true believers or not. Let's come up with a pragmatic approach which can deliver for people. So anyway, that was kind of the mindset I always had. And then as a East Yorkshire MP, I had onshore wind, and I had the developers behaving terribly. I kept telling them, and Sam was working for me at the time. I said, don't you realize you're going to, if you just keep trying to get a no as quickly as possible so you can go to the inspectorate and overrule local people, don't you see there's going to be a backlash and you'll be stopped? No, it's government policy. It'll all be fine. Of course, it did. It found a backlash, and it did get stopped. And what you've got to do is work with the grain of people as well as, and not just foist things on them. We can't just come along and say net zero's in an imperative, the science is ever stronger and you've just got to suck it up. We've got to work with the grain of communities, showing them that there's economic potential, but also listening to them and hearing their voices in terms of the infrastructure and other aspects which is involved. So anyway, just to share some of those are kind of where I came in, and so I've been interested in this for many years. I got involved with and then became chairman globally of Globe International. Sounds like some nefarious outfit, but it's Global Legislators Organization for Balanced Environments. What we did was bring MPs together and as backbenchers rather than, it all seemed to me it was governments and sort of NGOs and self-appointed civil society rather than the elected representatives who were being engaged in the conversation. Something which I still think could do with being improved at COPs, and maybe it will be from next year. But Globe was very much bringing people together to talk about how do we create the frameworks, how do we create the incentives that align the incentives of the private sector, predominantly actors, with the environmental and economic outcomes that we're looking for. So that's where after years of being interested, I was then asked by Liz Truss first and then by Rishi to be the Minister for Climate. I think my title is going to change to Minister for Energy and Climate, which probably more accurately reflects it. So coming back from the COP, though, just to say, when Alok Sharma took over and the UK took over the presidency of the COP, just 30% of global GDP was covered by net zero pledges. It's now 90%. I think pretty phenomenal achievement that we should be rightly proud of. And so that gives a kind of global context. And then Glasgow, having pushed countries to recognize the need for this, to set, with differing levels of certainty and certitude, admittedly, but having got most of the world to recognize the need to do this, then what we did was to come up with an architecture of acceleration, as one of the champions called it, and that is to look sector by sector. So if you look at zero emissions vehicles, we kind of led. Do you remember when we said we were not going to allow any cars or vans to be sold in this country with any emissions from the tailpipe from 2035? And everyone said, that is ridiculous, that isn't going to happen. Now the EU has basically come behind that, and other countries are following on, which setting that kind of mandate sets then a global standard where you, in order to invest in automotive, you are going to have to start aligning with that, otherwise you're going to be excluded from many of the major markets. And So talking with our US colleagues and others, we're looking very much to get them to do likewise. And we're doing the same thing with something called the First Movers Coalition that John Kerry had a part of setting up, getting companies to say, right, we're going to set a target for a green steel, a certain percentage by a time in the future, again, to send the market signal that investing in green steel is something that which can reasonably be done. So I think that architecture of acceleration and this breakthrough agenda, which we look at looking pillar by pillar, sector by sector, and collaboratively among countries to get them to join and set mandates, set targets, move together, innovate, and, as I say, drive and use the frameworks to create incentives for market. That does give me hope for the future, but obviously the COP27, it had a major breakthrough in terms of this loss and damage issue and the establishment of a fund, but what it was weak on was keeping the 1.5 degrees alive as still on life support, and Alok was right to express his frustrations that we weren't seeing more countries looking to not just phase down but phase out coal and do so with other fossil fuels over time. But that's at the I say, international level. So for us, though, leaning in ahead of others, as we have, and we should be, not only did we have that achievement under our COP presidency, but we've cut our emissions by more than any other major economy in the world since 1990, something to be proud of. And as we go forward, leaning in ahead of others, and I hope we will see fast progress in those technologies which are required to decarbonize industry, namely carbon capture and storage and hydrogen. Everyone I've spoken to, those are the two requirements if you're going to do it. If we can lean in ahead of others, and we happen to have the geological storage between us and Norway, we have 80% of the CO2 storage that's estimated in Europe. We've got that. We've got industry, closely in geographically located. So if you take the Humber, which I know well, and Tees, but together they're more than 50% of UK industrial emissions, quite remarkable. And the East Coast cluster, the government supported there, can look with hydrogen and CCUS in combination. We've got a real chance of developing the technologies at scale to deliver the world's first net zero industrial cluster, which I hope will mean not only do we develop those technologies, and players like BP can be part of then selling those solutions around the rest of the world, which is kind of my theory. We lean in ahead, we develop the solutions, and then we sell those technologies around the rest of the world to help the rest of the world meet the challenge. My vision would be to keep that coalition I talked about together, that we lean in ahead, we develop the technologies, we develop our industrial base and export with it, so that we not only get to clean up our environmental impact, help the rest of the world do so, but we hopefully become even wealthier while we're doing it, while also bringing jobs and reindustrialization back to areas that previously were dependent on high carbon, but can move to a low carbon future, and by doing so can have a renaissance. So that's the kind of vision in that space. In terms of other domestic issues, we are looking to move from our, I think it's over 13 gigawatts of offshore wind that we have now to 50 by 2030. This acceleration brings huge challenges, would be an understatement, not only in terms of the financing and the deployment and the supply chain to generate the energy. And our last round of contracts for difference actually saw 11 gigawatts added, so it's pretty remarkable success. But we're also going to need the grid. I don't know if you've heard about that today, but talking of, Louise talked about her 18 billion by 2030. Well, the grid has to spend 6 times more in the next 7 years than they have in the last 30, which is something to, so we need, without the grid, we can't connect the electrons and deliver them where they need to go, then this isn't going to happen. So for me, as having a couple of months into this job, it seems to me facilitating and supporting that is probably even more important, obviously more important in a way, than is the actual generation itself. But we're looking, we need across the piece from nuclear, and we've supported SMRs with Rolls-Royce. We've have put £210 million this year into that. We need more offshore wind, and as I say, we're accelerating that, moving to annual CFD rounds. We need solar. We need technologies across the piece, as well as hydrogen and carbon capture for industry. But the rest of the world, so going back to my other point, the rest of the world is following. They're recognizing the science, which gets stronger and stronger. And companies increasingly, and the financial system, are aligning their forward investment plans with net zero as well. So there is an opportunity for us to carry on, build on the fact that we've led the world in reducing our emissions, build those technologies and solutions, and then sell those around the rest of the world. And we've got to do that in a way which balances issues around affordability. I mean, one of the amazing things about the CFDs was that when they were put out to sea, and I say having these wind farms imposed on my constituents wasn't terribly popular. So when they said we're going to stick them out in the North Sea, I thought politically, frankly, great. But I thought, I'm not sure whether putting them in the North Sea is really going to accelerate the cost curve down, which has always been my theory about the most important thing we needed to do. So I was a bit skeptical there, but how wrong I was. We brought in this system, which we pioneered, of contracts for difference, basically a guarantee. You know, how much, if you stick it up there, you put 5 gigawatts out there, how much do you need as a guarantee for you to be able to build it? £120 a megawatt hour, they said in 2015, in the first auction. That's what it came in at, and they were built. The second auction, 2017, it came in about 60, so it halved. And the third auction, the third auction in 2019, so just 2 auctions later, £39.50. Absolutely remarkable. It turned out that by working at scale and by learning the lessons and by giving the certainty of the income and showing the deliverability, the cost of capital came down, which is fundamental to delivering the cost down of something like that. So we've kind of shown what we can do. If we get the right frameworks in place, we unleash the market, then even in somewhere as inhospitable as the North Sea, you can transform the funds and bring home lower costs for people. So that going forward is what we want to continue to do, trying to understand the incentives of the actors within, lower their cost of capital, give them sufficient pipeline and certainty that they can invest, and by doing so we can build more and more industrial capacity here. Which would be my one, coming in as a minister, apart from all those other things that I've said, and delivery, my number one thing is I look at offshore wind and I think we didn't, maybe it's just because of where we were at the time, maybe it was because of the nature of our existing supply chains, we didn't build the industrial capability that you might have expected we would for a country that was leading the world in this technology. So going forward in hydrogen, carbon capture and other ones, and the expansion of offshore wind, I want to see more of that come onshore here and then be able to go out and export to the rest of the world as well. And if we can do that, and we can keep the bills affordable in the meantime, but there are obviously things like levies that need to go on bills, someone's got to pay for it. We've got to balance that out, but if we can do it and we can deliver at pace and drive the cost curve down, then I think we can keep the coalition of support together. We can do our bit for the environment at home, and we can actually build a more sustainable economy going forward. That's the vision, and happy to talk to you about it further. Paul, thank you.
Graham, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to see you again. So what we're going to do for the next period is this. I'm going to ask 4 or 5 questions for Graham, but really this is your session. And when I've done that, I'm going to open the discussion up and maybe come back myself a bit later. And we will have to wrap up at about 5 to 12. So that's what we're going to do. So I just want at the start to try to establish how important this agenda is to the government. And we'll ask in this way that a few weeks ago, Alok Sharma is still in cabinet. Liz Truss is Prime Minister. You have your job, you have the right to attend. Now, Alok's no longer there because his term at COP presidency is all coming to an end, so he's gone. You're still in place, but you don't have the right to attend. So a critic might say, this is a pretty bad signal from the government. They're really not overly concerned with this, and they're completely preoccupied with the short-term economic crisis, with the fate of the NHS over the winter, and energy security and net zero are going to play second fiddle. So what would you say to that?
Well, I would say that the Prime Minister is absolutely committed to net zero, understandably given the situation when he came into office. His focus was on moving to the autumn statement, supporting that. But his commitment is absolutely in place, and that would be my signal to send out today that this government is determined. There's, as I say, there's no, in some sense, there's no choice. You know, we are where we are, and we've got to go for it, and we are going to go for it. And if we don't, it'll just cost more. We'll lose opportunity. We have, in certain technologies, we have a lead, and in the past we've been better at developing the original IP, haven't we, at small scale, and then it turns into $1 billion business somewhere else. We can't let that happen.
And just following on from that, our last session was chaired by Rachel Wolfe from Public First, and Public First did an invaluable map of manifesto commitments during the summer leadership contest. Now, I know some people regard these manifesto commitments as a sort of kind of wish list, but I think if a candidate makes a pledge, you ought at least to take it relatively seriously. Buried away in Rishi Sunak's commitments was he said, I'm committing to set up a Department of Energy all over again, and he wanted an energy support committee to look at keeping prices affordable. Now, you know, it's not my vocation in life simply to promote you, though I really wouldn't mind, but would that not be a good idea? And if Rishi Sunak committed to it in his manifesto, shouldn't government be moving it forward, or perhaps it is and we've not been told?
That is a matter for the Prime Minister, clearly, but I think he made clear that he would like to. I'm not sure that when he came to power was the right time to announce. I'm not sure that Louise and other people in the industry would have welcomed, notwithstanding the long-term signal that it would have sent, that we were going to go into the kind of crippling, time-consuming reorganisation which the establishment of a new department brings. So I think the Prime Minister took the view. I don't think his opinion has changed at one level, but on the other, that it wasn't the right time to do it, and that what we needed to do was crack on with, sorting out the immediate challenges and then sending the long-term signals to markets about our commitment to net zero and the different facets of that within the UK.
I think I'm going to ask one more before opening up, and I might come back and ask a few later, depending on how we're going. But I talked about these three legs of policy, and it seems to be a model you at least partly accept, because you referred to it during your remarks. Now, your very able colleague, Neil O'Brien, like you, has been sort of in and out of office during recent turbulent events. And he wrote a piece for us about energy policy while he was out. And he pointed out that some coal stations have been brought back into commission to deal with the crisis. And I want to ask about that sort of development in the light of two parts of the policy agenda potentially conflicting. So there's the net zero target. There's also the energy security consideration. The more energy security need is met by kind of a short-term movement to gas, to coal, just stuff that could be bought now, the more difficult it is surely to hit the target. So is that right? And how do you reconcile the two?
I don't think it is right. We're not commissioning coal as we speak. We've basically we've got it sitting in to be used if necessary in order to give us that security. But we're not burning, or we're not seeking to burn it now. We're looking at it as that sort of last resort, and we are committed to phasing it out by 2024. But we're in a transition. I mean, you get this whole thing. You get it with oil and gas. You know, why on earth? You're net zero. Why are you allowing there to be more blocks in the North Sea when you're telling everyone to leave their oil and gas in the ground? It's hypocritical. Well, we're net importers of oil and gas. The idea that it's morally superior for us to spend billions, possibly, I don't know, could it be $1 trillion? I don't know, between now and 2050, buying foreign oil and gas rather than producing our own. There's something morally superior about it if it's foreign, if it's our own, is just a nonsense. I mean, there's economic idiocy as well. I don't think coal mines do not drive coal burning. Coal power stations and their need for fuel drive that. And I don't think oil and gas, the easy target that they are, I don't think big oil and gas, I mean, if they lobby effectively, I suppose they could be a nefarious force at times, but producing oil and gas doesn't drive usage. It's usage and demand that drives oil and gas production. We're going to be net importers all the way to there, and basically what we're doing, we had 11 gigawatts, as I say, in our last round, the biggest yet, of clean energy. Every day that we commission more and more clean energy, we reduce our reliance on that. But in the meantime, in part of the transition, especially with the crisis caused by, I mean, there were already pressure on prices before Russia invaded Ukraine. It's not all about Ukraine, but that exacerbated an existing pressure in the situation. We take a balanced approach going forward. But what we have, with the five-year budgets set in the Climate Change Act, I was on the joint committee way back in 2007, and our demand is capped and is coming down. So the idea that us commissioning more oil and gas in the North Sea is somehow going to drive or break net zero is not true.
Of course, if necessary, it means you might have to, because the world's uncertain, and you have an uncertain world, and you have a set target.
Yeah, well, it's coming down, and we have a managed way to do that. So there's, we are commissioning all the time more and more clean energy, and we want nuclear to be part of that as well. So that's why we're looking both at SMRs and the Chancellor the other day, of course, announced the funding and support for Sizewell. So, which is going to be a significant rebirth of UK nuclear capability. We were the first country in the world, weren't we, to have a commercial-scale nuclear power station. Somehow we, like so often with these things, we sort of initiate it too brilliantly and then lose interest. We're going to go back, and we're going to go back hard, and that will make, we want 24 gigawatts by 2050, which could be around a quarter of our electricity supply. Yeah, that's going to create lots of jobs, both in construction and operation, and I think it's another good thing.
Okay, I'm going to take two. If you wouldn't, lots of hands. If you wouldn't mind giving your name, and if I may repeat Mark Wallace's remarks about the tyrannical powers of the chair. Questions, please, not statements. I'm going to go there and here to start, and then we'll carry on. Yeah.
Thank you. Elliot Hammer, I'm a lawyer. Political question. I'm a lawyer. A political question for you. One of the reasons why the Conservative Party has been so successful throughout the 20th and 21st century is because it doesn't have a strong party on its right. I see that one policy of a emergent party on the right would be scrapping net zero. What would you say to people who say that the Conservative Party needs to make sure that it's in relation to climate change, it has a right-leaning policy?
And there. Yeah.
Hi, Alex Wolf, Commercial Director, Certus Energy. We supply about 40,000 trucks a week. And a question to the Climate Minister is that we could change the Treasury taxing policy on liquid fuels that drop in. That means that heavy goods vehicles could change to HVO, which saves 90% of CO2 wheel to wheel overnight pretty much. But in the past, we've only given tax benefits to engine change, not fuel type change. I'm just wondering what the Climate Ministry believes about drop-in fuels with the existing infrastructure.
Thank you, Alex. I'll go in reverse order. That's a Treasury matter, so I will completely duck it. But I'll take that as a submission nonetheless for my internal government conversations. We keep these policies under review. As I say, we should always be looking at is how you get the right framework that aligns the incentives of actors with the public goods that you seek. So it seems like a good, and I look forward to, if you want to follow up and write to me, then I'll gratefully get it. You're absolutely right around this. I mean, if net zero, going back to those people in 2005, the kind of the smug kind of, I'd say this, separating people into sheep and goats, this thing, if you don't believe in net zero enough, that just puts the back up of proper Conservatives who are rightly sceptical of anyone with anything to sell. And therefore, it's so important not only that we've got to show policy that's delivering, we've also got to talk about it in a way that means Conservatives don't feel that they're, getting, got some preacher who's trying to sell them a religion which they don't want to buy. So language is important, and yeah, I'm not some net zero ideologue, but as I say, the science seems to, if anything gets grimmer over time and more solid. If it is a conspiracy, it's the best one ever. And managing this in a way that's practical, that means that we can get some jobs out of it, that brings life back to parts of the country that were high carbon before and have been a bit down since. We're lucky. I mean, where would we do this? We're going to do it in the northwest. We're going to do it in the northeast. We're going to do it in Wales and Scotland. You're doing this stuff where we most want it if we're going to deliver levelling up. And I think as long as you don't sound like some ideologue trying to ram it down everyone's throats, and I'm not saying we should invite every climate-denying so-and-so to every meeting, but I hate the idea of it becoming some pure thing. There's sort of the pure are here and everyone else is damned. I don't believe that. So it's work in progress to make sure we keep the coalition together. It should be practical.
Just a quick follow-up. How much of a problem is it that there clearly is a substantial minority of members, if the ConHome survey is right, who don't support the policy? There's then a smaller minority who don't believe in man-made climate change at all. And there was a question in the last session from the gentleman in the velvet jacket there in the third row, who pointed out that these voices have got considerable amplification in parts of the Conservative supporting press. And I think he quoted Lord Frost in the Daily Telegraph, who's not exactly net zero's biggest fan. I mean, how much of an issue is this for the party and therefore for the government?
Well, we're quite unusual in this country in having had this coalition, broad support. So, I mean, it could be an issue, but that's why we've got to be practical about it. And we've got to prove that it's delivering. Every day that we can deliver good things, every time, we need to talk about the exports that we make. We've got to talk about the weaknesses in our implementation as well as trumpeting the strengths, because then, again, that's what Conservatives hear nothing but, oh, we're so brilliant. They're just going to go, yeah, right. And they'll start to say, I don't want to be part of that religion. So it's an issue, but I don't believe it's by, sometimes the instinct of the left is to cast them out. Don't talk to them. Don't let them in the room. Like no one's allowed to have a different opinion. That's not a very Conservative approach. When I hear skeptics and can come up with decent arguments, I think, well, that's interesting, worth hearing, and then you just got to counter it. I think so, and certainly, and absolutely, going at them and excluding them just creates the sense of this, of a movement, which then looks for an outlet. And we don't need it to find an outlet. It needs to have a perfectly good outlet in the Conservative Party. And if they're sceptical about what I'm saying and they want to question the cost versus the jobs and all the rest of it, well, great. Because we probably ought to focus on that more, rather than just being in a room full of believers going, oh, great, yeah, there's going to be jobs and growth and net zero. I could do with voices going, well, let's look at this particular, let's look at that expenditure and what we get back. How will nuclear actually work and where does the money actually go? That's good stuff, if you ask me. If it puts pressure on us to do a better job of showing more economic benefit in this country, then all power to their elbow, I say.
Okay, let's take two more. So I'm going to look for the gentleman right at the back there, and then the lady there, yeah.
Hi, good morning. Andrew Crossan, I work in public affairs. I guess my question to you, it's something that's come up throughout the day today, and it's something that industry have really been pushing for. That's the energy bill. I've heard you speak before and say that it was under review. I've heard from other people in the civil service and other people in government say it was on pause, and that it would be returning. It was on pause due to more pressing legislation, such as the cap on energy bills. So my question to you is, will we see a return to the energy bill in its previous iteration? And is the government still committed to those key provisions within it?
Yes, we're committed to those provisions, and you will hear about it very soon.
Okay, and
have we heard the last of fracking was the question. Probably. You know, I mean, it depends on if this. What we have committed has gone back to our 2019 manifesto, which was a moratorium until the science indicates that it is workable. So it's how easy it is to gather more information in order to show that it might not have desperately negative seismological impacts, and it might actually, we don't even know if it's economically feasible. So what the British Geological Survey that we published alongside a few weeks ago said was that we don't know much, we haven't got enough data to make any judgment on a whole number of fronts. So in some senses it would need more work. But the backlash in Parliament, and I was the lucky minister at the dispatch box, being told 2 minutes before I gave my winding up speech in a fractious house that it wasn't, after all, a confidence vote. You've seen that, when you've watched the international rugby and you watch them somehow accidentally they just throw the ball in the air and it's the complete hospital pass. Well, that was me on the receiving end. But anyway, so we'll see. It doesn't feel like there's much political space for fracking to come back at the moment.
yeah, I can imagine you there at the dispatch box with the note coming up, right? You have to read the note. It's obviously two more. So there's the gentleman there, and yeah, sorry.
My name is Andrew Smith. I'm Head of Public Affairs at Weber Shandwick. I noted that actually in your keynote you didn't mention the importance of continued production of oil and gas in the UK, but you did mention it in your remarks, which probably highlights the complexity about trying to explain to the public why the production of oil and gas can be compatible with delivering net zero. But don't you think we're at there's a danger? We have a Labour Party who seem to have an ideological opposition to production of oil and gas in the UK, and the government who you have expanded the licensing round, but now with the recent increase in the energy profits levy, we now have a rate of tax which is higher than a lot of our competitors. Isn't there a danger that despite your support for oil and gas production, actually the politics which makes it easy for both the government and the opposition to either tax or undermine the industry means that investors won't deliver and will face the problem of long-term energy security, which has been the theme of this morning?
Yeah, over there. Yeah.
Thank you, Robert Morland. I'm a former member of the European Parliament, but I should also mention I've done a lot of work for the Pew Center for Global Climate Change, which is an American organization, but it's on the side of the angels. My question quite simply is, with the COP, and I actually been to a couple of COPs, what are you looking to go forward with from that? I know the target at 1.5 to be reached, but in terms of getting, for example, the more difficult countries on board, one did notice that the President of the United States and the President of China seem to be getting on very well, and they've known each other, obviously, from Biden's previous vice presidency. Are you hopeful, particularly over China, as it's really the most important country involved?
Thank you for those. Well, I could do with your help, obviously, if you're the head of public affairs at Weber Shandwick, because it seems quite an uphill battle to win. On the one hand, I look at it and I go, well, we're net importers. We're going to be burning a quarter of the gas we do today under net zero, in 2050. 75% of our overall energy right now today, and we cut our emissions more than any other developed economy in the world, 75% is fossil fuel today. So, producing our own demanding of the players that they have ever higher production standards, which we are. They committed voluntarily, with a little bit of, but they've done it voluntarily, 50% reduction in production emissions in the North Sea by 2030. Fairly, that's good stuff. When liquid LNG from Qatar, because of the gasification, all the various processes and transportation, basically got 2.5 times the production emissions around it that gas from the UK does. And yet, I can't say I'm winning the argument in the public sphere, that clearly it's morally, environmentally, and let alone economically, it sustains our jobs, it sustains jobs in offshore capability and big oil and gas capability, which, with them increasingly aligning themselves with net zero, is a capability we're going to need to deliver net zero, especially with carbon capture, hydrogen, and all this other stuff going on. So anyway, I don't know. It's an issue. And your final point around the taxation levels, well, I want to, we had something from Shell, didn't we, suggesting that it might affect their investment plans. You've obviously got to get the balance right. And one of the things I remember, was it Philip Hammond when he was Chancellor years ago? Because the North Sea is such a mature basin, and production was just falling, and people thought it was a bit inevitable. And with tax changes that created the incentivization, it was, then they managed to, they weren't reversing them, the overall decline, but they were actually producing a lot more than otherwise could have been expected. So going forward, we have to balance the politics, win the argument, so all help gratefully received on how best to do that. Because without it, we don't have the social license as a government and everything else to maintain the system and the incentives that we need to maximise return from the North Sea, which I think is an environmental as well as an economic and a net zero compliant good. But I recognise it's not always easy to win that argument.
We've got 3 minutes left. We have 2 questions. They will be really short. So who's got a short question? Sir, and... Yeah,
sorry, remind I didn't answer your...
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And I'm without notes and being... I blame flying back from Sharm. Remind me again what your key point was.
Well, particularly China.
Oh, yes, China, and the liaison with them. Well, they are doing a tremendous amount, but where we're looking for, where are we going forward? It's this breakthrough agenda, pillar by pillar by pillar. And so we're pushing for things on coal. The G20 came out with a much stronger statement in a sense than COP did, and talking about phasing, I think they used phasing out coal. So we've got to the point now on coal, which is obviously the filthiest of the things. I think there's just 6 countries that have 90% of the pipeline of new coal-burning power stations, of which China is out and away the biggest. So we're nudging them along, like we're trying to nudge the Americans. Why don't they align with us on 2035? Not a single car or van sold without zero emissions from the tailpipe. It's those sorts of things. That's, I think, sector by sector. The first breakthrough agenda that we haven't launched is going to be, I went to the soft launch at COP, which the French and the Moroccans are jointly leading, and that is on buildings. Buildings is 30% of emissions. And they're going to, and I think they'll work hard. I know they'll put the time in and try, and hopefully there'll be a big ministerial launch next year. And we will then see in buildings, we'll see stuff. Sorry, Paul, banging in.
It's perfectly right, because we have simply run out of time. It is just amazing how these sessions always begin, and I think, how are we going to get through? And they shoot by without so much as a glance. So I have a list of thanks to make. And I want to begin, Graham, by thanking you for coming today and sparing us so much time when at any moment you might have been whizzed back to the House to answer an urgent question at almost no notice. And then very many thanks to Louise and BP for sponsoring this event and making it all possible in the first place. I'm rather with you. You said to me just when I met you before the event began, we just simply want to get on with it. And it's been a great discussion today, but I think maybe we should take our cue from that. And then many thanks to the ConHome team of Mark, Angus, Sarah and Abigail, especially Sarah, for whizzing around with the microphone during the questions, for allowing this to happen. And last but not least, all those who've joined us online and you for making this event possible this morning. So thank you all very much.